Sicha Mishpotim, Tavshin Nun Beis. Last week, I think I explained it inside. Let's do it now. I mean, outside. Let's do it inside. It's Ois Hey, page 176. This is about the words. The Rebbe and the Sicha speaks about what's going on in the world, and that the superpowers of the world made a decision to sort of create a new era, in the sense that we're all going to work together on getting rid of, first of all, weapons of mass destruction, nuclear weapons, and Bechlal stop, manufacturing weapons and work towards that any issue between one country and another country should be worked out and should be negotiated rather than fight it out. And the Rebbe says that this is not an ordinary political change, but this is actually the beginning of the fulfillment of the words, the kitzur chabesim li'itim, that the swords will be turned into plowshares. That's number one. And number two, not only is it that the swords will be turned into plowshares, but this nevuah is done by Moshiach. So we're seeing another thing that's being fulfilled here, that Mashiach will have an impact on the nations. We can already see how Melech HaMashiach is having an impact on the nations, which means, even though we never saw anything physically happening, but like it says, Leiv Malachim B'Sarim B'Yad Hashem, the hearts of kings and ministers is in the hands of Hashem, which means that everything that they do and they rule all is from Hashgacha Pratis, more than the average. It's much more open. So that means Hashem is the one, through Mashiach, that changed the minds of these people that they should do what they're doing. And then the Rebbe says, and we can see this in three things. A, the place that it happened. B, the time that it happened. And C, the parsha in which it happened. So A was the fact that it happened in New York. Well, of course, that's what the United Nations is. But the Rebbe says, that's waits in Derech HaTeva. But the deeper reason is it happened in a place which is close to Beis Rabbeinu Shebababel, the place where the Nasi Adir is. And that is an indication that this change in the world is coming from the Aveda of the Nasi Adir, of spreading Chassidus, spreading Sheva Mitzvah B'nai Noach, and that's what led to this change. The second thing is the time. It happened in the time which was near Yud Shvat, near Yud Aleph Shvat, which is also the day of the leadership of the Nasi Adir, and therefore this is also Bashgacha Pratis. Eivishter made it happen in that time, so we can see more openly how this is a result of the Avodah of the Nasi Adir. And then the Rebbe says it's also connected to the Parsha Mishpotim, and that's the part we're up to. How is it connected to the Parsha Mishpotim? So the Rebbe said, what is the Mishpotim begins with these two words, V'ele HaMishpotim, and it starts with a Vav, V'ele. So Rashi asks, what does the Vav stand for? And Rashi answers, the Vav means this is a continuation to the previous Parsha. The previous Parsha is Parshas Yisro. Parshas Yisro is the Parsha of Matan Torah. So Ve'ela Mishpotim means Af Elu Misina. I'm reading now from Hey. We explained it. I want to do it now inside. Af Elu Misinai. The halachas and Mishpotim in this Parsha also come from Sinai. Just like the Aseres HaDibros is clearly from Har Sinai, so to Mishpotim come from Har Sinai. And why is it necessary to explain that? Because these halachas in this parsha are logical, ethical, moral. They make so much sense that I would think, okay, this has nothing to do with Sinai. This is just logical. This is just moral and ethical. Everybody understands this. No, we should know that these were given from our Sinai. That's the Pashup Pshat and Rashi. But remember, Hey begins with the words Ba'omek Yoso. Let's explain it deeper. Pirushay, not only that they come from Har Sinai, but Gam Hasiba, the reason, Lachi of Sichli, the reason, the deeper spiritual reason why these mitzvahs make sense, because Sinai, it comes from Sinai. Lule Nisinasim is Sinai, if not for the fact that Hashem gave these commandments at Har Sinai, then the logic of a person would not dictate that that's what we should do, that's where we should live, just like other mitzvahs, the other ones, just like the ones in the previous parsha, which means that there's, let's say, it says in Aseret Libris to keep Shabbos. They can't say that's illogical, that the logic dictates you must keep Shabbos. So why do we do it? Because Hashem said so. So what he's saying is that the fact that these mitzvahs make sense is because it was given at Hasina. The explanation to this is Shachiv HaSichli, the fact that it makes sense logically, in these commandments, Nislabesh Ritzayin Shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem's will invested itself. In other words, Hashem's will, Shemitzad Atzma, in its own right, it's above Chokhmah. Remember, we learned that Hashem himself is Ein Sof, is infinite, is above Chokhmah. But in these mitzvahs, Hashem wanted that his light, which is Ein Sof, should evolve and should manifest through the realm of Chokhmah. Gam b'Chokhmah says Baruch b'Torah. So therefore, in Torah, it now makes sense. Even though in essence, it comes from a place in Hashem that's above and higher than logic. And once it makes sense in Torah, the Kemish HaTorah he difterois or pinkisois, is the method that says that the Torah is like the blueprints, just like an architect writes up a blueprint, and then when they build, the builders, they build it according to the blueprint. Torah is the blueprints of creation. Hashem first created Torah. He looks at Torah, and based on that, he creates the world, which means the world gets its chayis from Torah. Being that the world was created through Torah, Behem Nivra Ha'olam, Nasa Dvarim Elam, Mechiyavim Begidrei Ha'olam. Once this becomes part of Torah, that these commandments make sense, this becomes the nature of the world, and it makes sense in the minds of people. Also the seichel of the nations of the world. In other words, not to think it makes sense by a person, because we have a nefesh alakiz. The nefesh alakiz is a chelik of the kami ma'al mamish, and that's why it makes sense. No, it makes sense in the realm of logic of every human being, even those that don't have a nefesh alakiz. Shedaita neita ledvarim shemachiyavim mitzad chachmasa shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu Sinai. And in the footnote 42, the Rebbe speaks about that thing we spoke about, that other mitzvahs, Hashem, also come from Hashem, and they're also from Ein Sof, from Hashem's infinite light, but Hashem did not want those mitzvahs to take on reason and logic. And therefore, when it comes to other mitzvahs, a person could say, really, from my end, I'd be ready to do this, or ready not to do this. The only reason that I'm following these instructions is because Hashem said so. When it comes to the moral and the ethical things, if a person would say, from my end, I'm ready to kill or to steal, but I'm not doing because Hashem says so, that's against Torah. Why? That's also from Ein Sof. The answer is Hashem wanted these things to become part of our nature and personality, that to do these things is absolutely unacceptable, logically. So even though it's supposed to be unaccepted logically, but that itself is because Hashem wanted it this way. Based on this, we can say that the words Meisiv al Rishonim, that this is to add to what it said in the previous parsha, that these mitzvahs come from Sinai. Mishpotim shnitim v'senim v'shochem gam b'seichel ha'adam. Shezeu teichen achidush the Matan Torah. This is what Matan Torah is all about. Shebotla ha'gzeira v'ha'hefsek shebein ha'leim v'tachtonim. In other words, before the Torah was given, it says there was a partition between heaven and earth. And after the Torah was given, Hashem took away that partition, and now heaven can come down to earth. Spirituality can come down. So the Rebbe is saying this also affects these points. What does it mean that there's no more partition? Chachmasa shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that which is Hashem's wisdom, could come down and become part of human intellect. In other words, initially Hashem is Ein Sof. Then Hashem evolves his Ein Sof understanding that it makes sense logically. And once it makes sense logically up there, then Hashem, through Torah, allows that this wisdom and the fact that it makes sense by humans from a human perspective. In other words, not that I feel that from my perspective I would think differently, but because Hashem said so, we have to keep it. That's other mitzvahs, but not these. These are mitzvahs that Hashem wanted it to become, that from my human perspective, this is right and that's wrong. What?
How does that explain when those things don't make sense to people, or when people are not, like, are willing to do like these awful things, like,
I mean, even things that are moral and logical.
yeah,
When people start arguing about moral and logical things, I don't know if you can really explain much. It's off the chart. In other words, imagine someone say, "I don't see what's wrong with killing somebody."
so,
Try to explain it.
so
I
can't
explain
explain it?
No,
Why? Are those people just broken?
no, because it makes sense. And if it doesn't make sense to them, it is not even a way of explaining it. It just it's less logical. Someone asks you, how do you explain the reason why you think that stealing is wrong? You're going to say, well, it's wrong. Someone worked for something and you take it away. And I'll say, no, I think it's even better. They worked for it and I don't have to work and I get it without working for it.
Yeah. So many people feel that way.
Yeah, anything you today you can decide on anything and it will become make sense. But then you can't, they're really not using their sense. That's what they're really saying is, I want to do what I want to do, and I will declare that this makes sense. You know, it's like they had this I just saw someone, I guess someone who was arguing against one of these sort of moral things that are going on in the world. And he has this guy, actually it was somebody not Jewish, and he's complaining about the fact that he applied for a job. And they said to him, what are your qualifications? We need, are you a lawyer? So I don't have a degree, but I'm a lawyer. I decided that I'm a lawyer. What do you mean you decided you're a lawyer? Are you a lawyer? No, I'm not a lawyer. I didn't go to law school. I didn't get any degrees, but I decided that I'm a lawyer. And I think you should respect that. You have no right to not respect my opinion. There was a very cute video also that was circulating for a long time, where parents came to school. I don't know if you ever saw it. This has nothing to do with Yiddishkeit. This is general. Came to school. Their child in school wasn't doing well, so they came to the teacher. And and it's a little boy of 7 years old. What's the problem? Said he's not doing well. Like I asked him how much is 2 plus 2, so he said it's 22. And the parents say, so what's wrong? 2 plus 2 is 4, and he's saying it's 22. Where do you have the right to tell him and force your opinion on him? His opinion is that it's 22, and we also think it's 22. Okay. And then the story goes on, and more parents came, and there was a demonstration, and they threw the principal out, and he was fired because he doesn't respect other people. I mean, that's what's happening when people decide that stealing is okay and killing is okay. You can't explain it. If it doesn't make sense, even these people didn't make sense, but they choose to block it out because they just want to do what they want to do. You can't say this to somebody because they'll attack you. How dare you not respect their opinion? But that's really what it is. There are things that just make sense, and this is moral, this is logical. Even years ago, when people did things like that, they didn't say it's moral logical. They said it's not moral, it's not logical, but I don't care. I want to have fun. But today, it's on a deeper level. They just declare this is moral. It's moral to kill. What did the Nazis say? They didn't say we're doing something immoral. They said we're making the world a better place. They decided that killing and murdering Jews and everyone else that they murdered is a perfectly okay thing to do. That's exactly what they did. And how could you argue with them? So basically, if you don't believe in the Eibishter, even moral things and ethical things, there's no who says this is moral because you think so? Oh, the whole society thinks so. So who cares? I think differently.
How are we supposed to engage with people like that? Like,
I think that is you can't. We once had a parent Shabbaton where someone brought up one of these subjects. They asked a question, and I started giving an answer. I had no idea. This is a sister, one of the girls that were there. I had no idea that she was gay or whatever it was. And I said something, and she hit the roof and started screaming and shouting. And we're so, what did she use? Words, we're so narrow-minded and bigots and whatever, not. And she stormed out of the room, and everybody ran after to calm her down. But I was just thinking to myself, okay, you have to accept everybody's opinion. But if I have an opinion, then I'm everything under the sun. That's wrong. It's a very very new way of looking at things. That everybody's entitled to make their opinion, and there really are no rules. If you don't believe in the Eibishter, in a certain sense, there are no rules. No one can tell me that what I think is immoral. There's no basis for it. Only because you think that way, but I think differently.
If we go on shluchas, we're going to see a lot of college students who have very different understandings of morals. And
it's very difficult. On the other hand, we do find college students that do turn around. I think once a person, what?
Like, yeah, we find that.
they end up here. But before they end up here, when they're still difficult.
I think that once a person comes more to the recognition of that there is an Eibishter and there are absolute truths in the world, because if you don't go with that, then like I said, today you're saying that this is okay and that's okay. Tomorrow someone says, I'm okay to kill, and you could be the victim, and you have nothing to say about it. So what do you say? What is the thing that turns around the mind of a person? I think it's recognizing the Eibishter. Not what is it that makes a person get it?
What?
Unless you say it's just a neshama, that's all. We have a neshama, and the neshama gets it. But being that the Rebbe says we can also spread Shem Mitzvah Ne'nayach, I mean, even by people that don't have a Nefesh kiss, they also have something godly in them that if you say the emes, they'll respond. The only thing that has to be done in a respectful way because they're not ready to hear something which they consider that offensive.
We're talking about people that are not Jewish or both.
Both. The Rebbe is saying here that those things that are logical, that are moral, that are ethical, they make sense to the point that any human being who is intelligent will tell you that logic dictates that this is right and this is wrong. Let's do the second paragraph on page 177. The inyan zeh, this inyan, that these things should be moral and ethical. This is something which is expected also of the nations of the world regarding observing their mitzvah b'nei noach. And the Rambam writes these words, even though logic dictates that these things, most of the mitzvahs related to non-Jews, are mitzvahs that logic dictates that it's right to do this and it's wrong to do other things. Nevertheless, in order for it to be considered that they're observing the 7 mitzvahs, which means the Rambam is saying both things are true. On one hand, logic dictates, but in order to be considered Sheva mitzvahs, the non-Jew has to do it because Hashem said so in the Torah. If they do it because logic dictates, then they're not considered Chassidi U'Mesolam. So it means when I go to someone who's not Jewish and I say there are 7 mitzvah in Noach, I need to emphasize this is what Hashem gave the world at Har Sinai. That you didn't have 630 mitzvahs, and the rest of the world has these 7 mitzvahs, but it's coming from Hashem. In other words, if it's not coming from Hashem, in a sense, I'm not serving Hashem, I'm serving myself. I'm basically doing something which I believe is good and moral, Like, could you meet people that are moral people, ethical people, and they will tell you that they're atheists? Is that possible? Absolutely. The only problem is that ultimately, even that person, if something will be really very, in a very crucial way related to him, then there, if it's based on seichel, then you can't trust seichel. Seichel will start producing all sorts of logical reasons to justify something that they don't want to do. Okay, so what is all this leading up to? Now it's leading up to Moshiach. Let's turn the page. Page 178. Remember we said this is all about the connection between what happened with the nations of the world and Pasha Mishpotim. Yeah,
We don't need to understand things with sechel, like Hasidut is sechel.
of course. We do need to understand what Seichel.
Okay, so
But I was explaining we have to understand what Seichel, but our chayvut to do it and to live that way is not based on Seichel, because Hashem said so. If it would be based on Seichel, then we're not really serving Hashem. I'm doing what I understand. But I don't understand, I won't be ready to do.
so first it's supposed to be like Kabbalat Ol,
Right.
and after sechel.
And then Seichel. Not only that, Yiddishkeit, Torah is all based on Seichel. There's no civilization in the world, there's no religion in the world that has so much based on Seichel like Yiddishkeit. You know, most other religions, it always was that the people who were the priests, they were the ones who did all the studying. The average person had no studying. You know, how long is it even in America that the average person gets an education? Anyone know about the history of education? Not that long. Really. Most people were not knowledgeable. Who had education were the elite, people who had a lot of money, or people that came from, you know, the people of the higher society. But the average Joe did not have an education. This idea that is a public school and everybody gets education, I think it's about 150 something more years. That's all. By Yidden, over 3,000 years ago, from the moment the Torah was given, there was an obligation that we have to educate our children from age 3. As soon as they start speaking, they have to start right away. Torah, Tziva, Lona, Moshe, and start learning. And education means learning, understanding, asking questions, giving answers like we have in Gemara and all that. So the Torah is not against using our intellect, on the contrary, but the commitment to do mitzvahs is because Hashem said so. Okay, let's look at Vov. Mizeh moving, for now it's understood also this episode, this event that happened. Not an episode, an event that happened, which is Achlotas v'Achrazas Manhigu Urim Yisrael, and the fact that the nations got together and they decided, let's bring the world to a place where swords will be turned into plowshares. So the Rebbe says like this: to turn swords into plowshares, meaning stop fighting, stop wars, it's something which is so logical. Seichel Nushi, human intellect says that the world should exist in a peaceful way, in a way of just, that there should be no wars. Wars bring destruction, Heres v'churban, and look out throughout all the ages how many millions and millions of people were destroyed by wars, Rahman al-Islam. So when they came up with this, no more wars, let's use peaceful negotiation. Was there something revolutionary here that they thought of? So at the end, they begged for an answer. How come they thought of it now? Why wasn't it something which was decided 100 years ago, 500 years ago? What changed? It makes so much sense. What are they saying? It doesn't make any sense. Look how many lives are being lost. Why didn't people do this before? Nevertheless, even though it makes perfect sense, the Meshech Kol HaDeiros, throughout all the generations preceding ours, is Nalu, Ribu, Mulchamas. There were many wars between the nations. If you look in the books that write the graphs about how the world has changed, they'll show you how many wars used to be taking place in the world at the time, how many lives were lost by these wars. And these wars that took place over these generations, Garmu Heres v'churban ba'olam b'nigul v'mischayim b'seichel anushi. There was destruction and devastation in the world, something which goes totally against logic. So what happened now? There's nothing that happened that you can say it changed logically. Whatever makes sense now made sense then. So why did they all of a sudden decide to change? So we must say that there's something deeper going on, and that caused them to think differently than the way they thought before. And that is, Asiba Mid, the true reason is because B'tkufa Achreina, in the recent times, we see that there's a surge in ending wars. People want to end wars, and they don't want fighting, and they want peace. And everything should be based on justice. There shouldn't be any dictatorship. There shouldn't be anything like communism. And especially we see this with this announcement. So why is it? Because we're coming closer to the time of Moshiach, and we're coming closer to the time where swords will be turned into plowshares through Moshiach. So now it's beginning to make sense. In other words, because it's a ruchnisika thing, a spiritual thing, that because we're approaching the time where the whole world will be living without wars, so already now people are feeling that need to change direction, that no longer there should be wars, there should be everything be done in a peaceful way. So let's look at page 179, makes it more clear. So basically, the announcement that was made by the leaders of the superpowers of the world to turn swords into plowshares is a result of Sinai, of Torah, being that the Torah sages said, Hine zeh Mashiach ba, that Mashiach's coming is imminent. First of all, the Frierdiker Rebbe already said this, that we finished our Avodah, and we're ready to receive Mashiach. And then there are many Rabbanim that also gave that halachic ruling that the time of Geula is already here. That Mashiach, who's a descendant of Beis David, Cheskes Mashiach, and we should come to the time of Vada Mashiach, is a psagdin which came from Sinai, from Torah. Once the Torah ruled that now is the time of Mashiach, and Mashiach has to come now, that made a change in the world, that things that didn't make sense before, now it makes sense. Because otherwise, there's no way of explaining why would all the leaders of the world decide it's not a good idea to have wars. After generations and generations of wars and devastations and life loss and people's families torn apart, and it didn't make any sense then. So just like we say about Mishpotim, that the reason why it makes sense to do Mishpotim, because it makes sense in Torah. So once the Torah rabbis or halachic authorities ruled that Mashiach has to come, so therefore they ruled that we need now has to be a time of swords turning into plowshares. So it began to make sense in the minds of people who are thinking from a purely logical place, that it makes perfect sense that from now on we should no longer have wars, and that's where it's really coming from. There's a Sicha, we'll still get probably a chance to learn it also, where the Rebbe talks about friends. And the Rebbe says that it was in the year Tavshin Lamed Daled, which is 1973. It was Simchas Torah. It was in the middle of Akafis. And the Rebbe took a siddur and walked to the end of the platform. And nobody understood what's happening. It's not, the Rebbe is not going to dance. The Rebbe is just taking a siddur and walking on the platform. And what happened was the Rebbe started to sing with the words of Derez V'Amuna with the French national anthem. I was there when that happened. I confess, I had no idea it was a French national anthem. But I saw that everyone in the room was from France, was jumping out of their skin. So I knew it had something to do with France. And since then, it became sort of a niggin. So the Rebbe said that a few months, the Rebbe didn't speak about it then, years later, Tavshin Beis, the Rebbe said a few months later, an interesting thing happened. The Prime Minister of France decided to make a change in the beat of this thing. This is a national anthem that's 200 years old. It was made in the time of the revolution, I think. And it's been the same way for 200 years. And the Prime Minister decided to make a change in the beat. I mean, someone who heard it from me said he's going to find out. He called the French consulate and he asked him, "Is it really true?" The guy said, "I don't know." Then he asked him to call, gave him another number to call. Eventually, he called the cultural department, and they said, "Yes, it's true that that year it was changed. Later, they changed it back." So he asked, "What's the reason why he changed it? Prime Minister should change the beat of the national anthem. Must be a reason." He said, "I don't know. I don't see anything recorded here as a reason why." So the Rebbe said the reason was because by making this into a niggin, it was taken away from the realm of Klippa, and it was taken into the realm of Kedusha. And therefore, the angel who's in charge of this country and the angel who's connected to this national anthem let go of it, and therefore the thought occurred to the leader of the country that I should change the beat in the niggin, because it's no longer, that niggin is no longer theirs. So he had to make a little change, and that with the change belongs to them. So basically, what the Rebbe is saying is what goes on in the minds and the hearts of leaders of countries come from Hashem, and through tzaddikim or through other ways that Hashem directly changes the mind in these people. So here the Rebbe is saying the fact that they decided that we should live now in a way which is turning swords into plowshares is a result of the fact that the Rabbanim gave a psak that Moshiach has to come now. And it's a result of the fact that the Rebbe never says himself. It says that the Rebbe, my father-in-law, said that now the Avodah is finished and we're ready for Mashiach. Even though he said it in 1928 when he said those words. But the Rebbe keeps repeating it now. So obviously the readiness now is more than what was ever ready then. And basically the Rebbe is saying, being that this is being announced in the Kedusha world, it has an effect on the Klippa world. But in what way the effect? That it makes sense to them. In other words, wouldn't it be more fascinating if, imagine you hear the news that the president, the prime minister of Russia and the president of the United States of America both came, I'm giving a hypothetical scene, came to 770, and they want to meet with the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he tells them, I think it's a good time to stop all these wars, and they come back and say, yeah, we're going to stop everything. Okay, that would be like, wow. So how come it happens in this way? So the Rebbe is bringing out a point in the Sicha. On the contrary, this is a stronger way. What's happening here is they're not doing it because a Rav told them to do it, or a tzaddik told them to do it. They're doing it because their own seichel told them to do it. That means the idea that we're now in the era of Mashiach's coming has now become sort of integrated and part of the world itself, to the point that Mashiach things are beginning to make sense to people from their perspective. Understand the point? That's even higher than it would be that some sort of Torah authority told them to change. So in a sense, it's still coming from Hashem, it's stemming from Kedusha, from Torah, but it's coming in a way that it became part and parcel of their understanding and their perspective. That means that Mashiach and Geula is now so much connected to the world that certain things which are Mashiach things are now beginning to register in people's minds and hearts from their perspective, as if they're the ones who thought of it totally on their own. Rashi says in Chumash, the famous Rashi in Chumash, why the Torah begins with Bereshis. What does Rashi say? That if the non-Jews will come and argue and say, you stole this land from us, we're going to say to them, no, Hashem created the world, and he gave it to whoever he wants, and he decided to give it to us. That means that what? That really the Torah should have been different. Hashem changed the order of the Torah, supposedly. So when the non-Jews will come to complain, we can give them a good answer. Think of it. Really? Hashem is changing the order of the Torah because the non-Jews will complain, you took our land, we should be able to answer them in a way that they'll understand it. Why is that so important? Who cares? It's our country. Hashem gave it to us. So we see from this, I mean, there's more to talk about this, which we will, but we see from this that, no, the Eibishter wants that the non-Jewish world, which is not the Nebuchadnezzar, the world in general, should see the emes from their perspective. It should make sense to them from their perspective that this is emes and this is right. And that's when Hashem's presence really becomes part of the world. As long as it's us sort of pushing our opinion on others, and they have no choice to accept it because of one reason or another, and it's not coming from them and from their understanding, it's not the ultimate merger of godliness with the world. But when godliness merges with the world, it comes to a place where people in the world recognize this from their own understanding. It makes sense to them, their seichel, and that's the ultimate of what Hashem wants, that should happen. So which recently there are certain non-Jewish people, leaders of countries or whatever, they say Israel belongs to the Jewish people because God gave it to them. They don't realize it, but they're fulfilling these words that Rashi said. And Rashi said this 1,000 years ago. And I think in all these 1,000 years, there was never even a setting where the non-Jews said, hey, this land belongs to us, because he had never had the land. Since the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, it was never in our hands. So there was never a time when the non-Jews were saying, you stole it from us. Now is the only time in history that has ever happened. And that's why the Torah was written in such a way, because Hashem wants them to understand. We find other things in Torah. It says, Hashem did this, so the nations of the world will complain about this and that, they'll have their answer. Why is it so important? The answer is, it's not just to satisfy a person. It means Hashem wants that this inyan in Torah should become part and parcel of human nature, human understanding, and not just something spiritual that's sort of causing others to conform, but it should be coming from them as like anything else that they understand logically. Okay, we will stop here.
So, אז אם הוא רשם בראשית, אז זה משהו שכאילו, אם הם קוראים אותו, אז למה הם בעצם מבינים שהתורה היא אמת? דרך המילה הזאת.
הם מבינים, הם מאמינים שהתורה אמת, הם לא מאמינים שארץ ישראל שייך לנו.
אוקיי,
אז אומרים להם, ראה, הקדוש ברוך הוא ברא את העולם.
אוקיי.
אז כל העולם הוא בעל הבית. אז אם הוא בעל הבית, יש לו הבעלות ליתן את הארץ הזאת לאומה זו, ולקחת את זה מאומה זו, ולתן את זה לאומה אחרת.
וזה הם מבינים דרך המילה בראשית?
Like somebody fell.
מישהו נפל? someone fell?